Hello, I'm Sally Yerkovich, Director of Educational Exchange and Special Projects at the American Scandinavian Foundation, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to our virtual conversation on repatriation and restitution in the Nordic countries. Joining me today are 4 museum professionals from Denmark, Greenland, Finland, and Sámi. Martin Appelt is the Senior Researcher and Curator at the National Museum of Denmark, responsible for the Arctic and subarctic ethnographical collections. He holds a PhD from the University of Aarhus in Arctic archaeology and has conducted archaeological and transdisciplinary fieldwork primarily in Greenland over the past 30 years. He has been involved in a number of Arctic exhibitions that have been shown in Denmark, Greenland, and internationally. And Martin is presently working on a large Carlsberg Foundation-sponsored project, Activating Arctic Heritage, developed in collaboration with the national museums in Nuuk and Copenhagen. For the past 16 years, Daniel Thorlufsan has been the director of the Greenland National Museum and Archives. Before joining the National Museum, he was a candidate in history and Greenland culture and language at Aarhus University and associate professor in history at the University of Greenland. As director of the museum, he oversees 35,000 archaeological and ethnological objects, artifacts, and human remains that were transferred from Denmark to Greenland. Eero Ehanti has an MA in art history from the University of Helsinki, a BA in conservation from Metropolia University of Applied Sciences, and 20 years of experience in various museum positions in Finland and abroad. Early on, he specialized in the conservation of cultural historical objects, but has since then worked on research, collections management, and exhibitions. Since 2016, he has led the conservation department at the National Museum of Finland, and has also chaired the Finnish committee of the International Council of Museums, or ICOM, for 6 years. For Eero, museums are a means for understanding, communication, and creativity. Eeva-Kristiina Harlin is an archaeologist from the University of Helsinki and an osteoarchaeologist from the University of Stockholm. She's finalizing her thesis, From Repatriation to Rematriation, Sámi Heritage and the Change of Paradigm, at the University of Oulu Institute for Sámi Studies in Finland. She has worked with themes such as Sámi cultural heritage, research ethics, and repatriation, together with the Sámi Society for a long time. Currently, she works with the new permanent exhibition for Sámi Museum SIDA, and also with the joint repatriation exhibition between SIDA and the National Museum of Finland. We're delighted to have all of you with us today to discuss repatriation and restitution in the Nordic countries. In recent years, the return of objects from museum collections to the communities, cultures, or countries of origin has come to the public attention more frequently. Of course, there is the ongoing debate about the return of the Parthenon marbles from the British Museum to Greece. And more recently, there have been many conversations about decolonization, the return to former colonies of objects acquired during colonial times. But what has received less attention, especially in the US, is the activity that has gone on in the Nordic countries, where curating practices have undergone dramatic changes as a result of repatriation. Today, we are going to look at how this has played out in Finland and Sápmi, Denmark, and Greenland. And to start, we're going to hear from Eero Ehanti about projects at the National Museum of Finland, where objects have been returned to their countries and communities of origin. Eero?
Well, thank you, Sally. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm very happy to talk to you from Helsinki. It's a beautiful night here in Finland, and I'm happy to go back to some cases in repatriation, in returning cultural heritage too. And I will start with the Mesa Verde thing that happened for some year ago, exactly, the actual repatriation, but of course it took a long time before that, before it was able to bear fruit, so to say. Mesa Verde collection. This is something that came to Finland some 130 years ago. There was a young man called Gustav Nordenskiöld who traveled to Colorado, Mesa Verde area, and he carried out some excavations there in the settlements in the Mesa Verde area. He collected a lot of objects, household objects and so on, but also some graves were excavated. And this material then ended up in Sweden, in Stockholm, where it was acquired by a wealthy Finnish man. He bought it, and then he later on donated it to the state of Finland, together with a lot of artifacts, a lot of artworks. This was a very significant kind of a seed for the National Museum's collection. And part of that was some 600 objects from the Mesa Verde area. And then years passed, there was discussions that this collection is in Finland, and discussions that whether it should be returned to the Mesa Verde area. But it was only in 2016 that things really started happening. There was a contact from a private person connected to the tribes in the area, and she contacted us and started to, or wanted to start this repatriation process. And at that time, we at the National Museum, we started doing inventory of the collections, that what we actually had. And we did that. We cataloged it properly, and then we opened everything that was possible in our online portal. So it was made available in a digital form at that time already. Not any of the funerary finds, but the other stuff. And then it was notified to the embassy of the USA in Helsinki that this is a stately owned collection. So this initiative from a private person is not enough. So there needs to be an official request from a stately level from USA. And that came later on in 2019, when there was an ambassador, Robert Pence, at the time in Helsinki, and he took this as one of his, I would say, primary goals to finalize this repatriation. And then 2019, the president of Finland, Sauli Niinistö, met the president of the USA at the time, Donald Trump, and they discussed this, and then it started happening. And eventually, there was a series of Zoom meetings between us and the tribes in the area, and the State Department in Washington, and our Ministry of Culture and Education, about how this could be possible, the return of these. Not everything at that point, but the grave finds, the ancestral remains, and the associated funerary objects. That was what was belonging to that discussion at the time. And who were we discussing with? There is some 26 tribes in the Mesa Verde area, and they have organized themselves so that there are 4 tribes that are the repatriating tribes. It's the Hopi, Akoma, Zia, and Zuni tribes. Those 4 tribes are the ones that we met in this series of Zoom meetings, and the Hopi tribe is kind of the leading party here from the tribe's point of view. And we discussed about details, how this could be realized, I mean, really very detailed, that how should these ancestral remains, ancestors really, they said strongly in the meetings, I remember, that this is not museum objects, this is humans. They are right in saying that. So we discussed that how we should pack them for this voyage back home, as we were talking all the time, how the flights and everything should be arranged. And then, of course, there was the question of funding all this. It's very expensive to carry out something like this. So it's a combination of funding from the embassy of USA embassy in Helsinki and the Finnish Ministry of Education special funding, and the National Museum's own efforts and funding as well. So a year ago, in September 2019, we were ready to start the journey back. And as you know, 2020, a year ago. So this is in the middle of COVID pandemic, which made a huge difference. So the initial plan was to invite the tribes to Helsinki and participate from that point on, and kind of escort the ancestors home. But that was not possible in the COVID situation. So eventually I traveled, I followed them all the way to Mesa Verde together with our Director General, and there were ambassador and staff from the embassy as well, and from our Ministry of Education. So we went there, and I followed it all the way to the reburial. Yes, this is what happened if I didn't make that clear enough. So it didn't go to any museum collection, but it was reburied right away when we got there. And I'm not able to talk about the details of the burial event at all, other than that it was very emotional, very something I will definitely remember my whole life, and it got me thinking about my own roots and my relationships to where I live, and about my family and my ancestors. And it was very touching, and I'm happy that I got to be there then. Afterwards, we were invited to the White House for a reception, because of it had been a stately level effort as well. So that's the story of Mesa Verde thing, something that started 130 years ago. I got to be the one who escorted them back there. And at the same time that this was happening, there was another return process ongoing. Actually, it started something like 2017, or actually exactly 2017, between the National Museum of Finland and the Sida Museum, Sámi Museum in Inari. And this is our Sámi collection, which is some 2,200 objects that had been gathered for a long time, during a long time, in the collection of National Museum of Finland. But we also felt strongly that this is something that should be returned up north, where it kind of belongs. And maybe this is now a point that I could open the floor to Eeva-Kristiina to follow on this project that she was in the middle of. I as well, but I'd be happy to hear Eeva-Kristiina start on this.
Sure. Eeva-Kristiina?
Yes, thank you, Eero. Yes, actually, it came as a surprise to me, as I have been working with collections and repatriation issues for a long time now, since 2006, and having seen how things have gone forward, and having been working in Sámi museums in Finland and in Norway, it came as a surprise that in 2017 there was this celebration of the first Nordic Sámi convention or Nordic Sámi meeting in 2017 in Trondheim, and there was this, an exhibition was opened carrying the name Bostede, which is the repatriation project between Norwegian Folk Museum and the Sámi Parliament. And it was actually, it had, this Bostede project had its roots in, or they received their inspiration from Utimut, which is the Greenland, Denmark experience, which we are going to hear later more about. But anyhow, so this, there was this exhibition, and Elina Anttila, the director of National Museum of Finland, and Juhani Kostet, who was at that time the director of National Heritage Agency, they traveled to see this exhibition. And you know, it was a fantastic event because Trondheim, which is quite a nice medieval town in the coast of Norway, you could see all the Sámi people in all over. You had Sámi flags, you heard Sámi music, everywhere were Sámi exhibitions. And then Helena and Juhani went to see the exhibition, and at the same time they decided then we want also to proceed with repatriation. We want to return at least part of the collections of National Museum of Finland, which was the largest collection of Sámi objects in Finland outside the Sámi area. So they came home and asked from Raila Kataja, who was the intendant of this collection, how should they deal with it? And Raila then said, well, let's give everything back. So it came as a surprise, kind of. Everything seemed that there is barely discussion about repatriation. And then suddenly we received invitations and went to this wonderful event where the directors of National Museum of Finland and Sámi Museum Sida signed this cooperation paper. And this repatriation process obviously has taken quite a lot of time. Well, not so much time than Bostede or Utimut, but anyhow, now in the fall of 2021, just 1 week ago, the last lorry or the last truck came with the rest of the objects. And now the whole collection is is governed and owned by the Sámi Museum Sida. But simultaneously, the two museums have written a cooperation agreement, which basically says that the National Museum has all the time the right to loan these objects, but the Sámi Museum is responsible for the representation of these objects. So the Sámi people can influence on the picture that is delivered to the majority people and themselves also in the National Museum, which is very important. I think we all can agree. And so that was one point, but simultaneously, about 3 years ago, we started a process together making exhibition. And Eero has been a great force behind this exhibition as well, working in the central with the objects and their conservation. But anyhow, we were a group of 10 people and we met weekly, many hours. Majority of the group was Sámi. And we managed to create a group which was really, it was fabulous. We learned from one another. We learned how to work together. We also spoke very much about our history, our shared history, which is not really nice because obviously when, I don't know how much the listeners are aware of the Scandinavian history, but anyhow, Finland is quite a young nation state. We received independence from Russia in 1917. So having said that, we were in the middle of nation building when these collections were collected, and they were not collected to represent the Sámi people, but they were collected to show what we, the Finns, are not. And so this exhibition turned out to be not a story of the Sámi people per se, but as a story of our shared history together, which we look through this collection. And in addition to these professional texts we have written, we have had Sámi craftspeople writing text. We have text that Sámi people have written to these objects, but we also have Sámi art, a lot of art there. So the exhibition itself presents the objects visible as they would be in a museum archive, but simultaneously they are kind of surrounded by Sámi art and Sámi music, and they are kind of surrounding the love that is waiting for them when they come home and when they come back to Sámi, the Sámi land where they belong. Because these objects contain a lot of silent knowledge, a lot of traditional knowledge, which is in them. But when they are situated in outside archives and museums, they are kind of silent, because it takes a lot of cultural knowledge to be able to interpret them fully, their meaning, and because you can see the background, you can see the philosophy, and many things from the objects when you know the language, when you are raised to read the language. So it has been a very I can say very emotional project, and repatriation mostly, in my opinion, is about emotions. Of course, it's about politics, it's about governing, but it's also about emotions and your connections, like Eero says, your connections to your roots and your connection in that way to yourself. So in a way, the Sámi people see the objects when they come back, they see them as their children that carry the knowledge from the foremothers and forefathers, from the ancestors, so that they can take the knowledge back to the society and then forward it to the future generations. Sally, your mic is not on.
Thank you. Sorry about that. No, thank you. That's a wonderful statement of the meaning of the objects that really has been silenced when they're in museums that aren't of their own culture and country and community. So with that, I'd like to turn now to Martin to address the project that happened a number of years ago at the National Museum of Denmark, which Eeva-Kristiina has referred to, Utimut, and the return from the National Museum of Denmark of a large number of Greenlandic objects. Martin?
Well, thank you for inviting us. We're happy to be here, and I'll refrain from giving a history of the Danish-Greenlandic relations, which is very long, and skip right to 1913 and 1916, when we for the first time hear voices from the Galaklisut member of the so-called Southern and Northern Councils in Greenland, making their voice heard on wanting artifacts to stay in Greenland and building museums on their own. It unfortunately took almost, it took all the way up to 1979 to be heard. It was more or less ignored. There was a lot of positivities in various circles, but it took until 1979 with the introduction of the Greenlandic Home Rule of these voices to be taken sufficiently serious. And from then on, a building process of a Greenland National Museum, it was called the State Museum until then, was initiated, and from 1980 1982. I'm sorry about all the dates here, but from 1982, the whole process started with a queen returning what's considered at the time the most important Greenlandic artist, some 240 watercolors from Arne Gagnek and Jens Kreutmann of Ganyamut to Greenland as the first part of the repatriation process. Then from 1984, 3 Greenlandic professionals and 3 Danish professionals created a committee initiated by the 2 governments together. And it took them all the way up to 2001 to go through all of these, as it came to be 35,000 artifacts, or to actually 35,000 numbers, which may cover considerably more artifacts. My guess is it's on the other side with 60,000 artifacts, because it's also archaeology and so on and so forth. And so that ended up in 2001. And one thing is of course returning physically the objects to Greenland from Denmark, but more importantly, it was a very large consideration to marry these artifacts with all knowledge we had acquired and have in archives and so on and so forth. It was created a database to sort of geographically locate them all. 4,500 sites when it came to the archaeological sites were recorded, and was then returned at the same time to Greenland, which have considerably expanded the database since, transformed it into a way better version and expanded it considerably. I should point out that from about 1982, all antiquarian responsibility rests solely with Greenland. And that means very literally that excavation cannot take place in Greenland without the approval of the Greenland National Museum. All human remains from Greenland was returned immediately to Greenland. They're still, we hope it soon is going to change, are still housed in our anthropological lab in Copenhagen, but that only awaits the building of the sufficient facilities to house these. And I think that was about the briefest version I could give of the history, and I can return with more later on.
Thank you, Martin, for condensing a very complicated process into an understandable but brief description. So now let's turn to Daniel and hear about what's happened since the objects have been returned to the Greenland National Museum.
Yes, thank you. Let me start with a brief history from where Martin ends his yeah. Okay, this repatriation process, starting in 82 from Denmark to Greenland, also called Utimut. It consists of a total number of 35,000, as Martin also said. It's mostly of archaeological, but also a considerable number of ethnographic artifacts alongside with archival material. In fact, the repatriation to Greenland consists of only a part of the Arctic and Greenland collection in Denmark, because National Museum of Denmark is the holder of one of the world's largest Arctic collections. The total number of the objects repatriated to Greenland was, as I said, 35,000, whereas around 100,000 archaeological and ethnographical items still remain in Denmark. Regardless of the unequal number of shared objects, the most important was that the two national museums possess collections of equal importance. Beside the act of return, the process also result in a broad cooperation and cooperation on the objects on both sides into national museums regarding research and dissemination. So today we have ensured representative collections at both museums, I would say. The cooperation was formalized with the appointment of the committee with professional backgrounds to monitor and head the process. And this committee consists of 3 members from both sides. Apart from being sanctioned by 2 governments of Denmark and Greenland, all decisions on how to divide the collections were exclusively based on museological arguments. This means that even if the process was politically motivated, the individual negotiations were not. Based on decisions, the committees made proposals for the return, and to implement the committee decisions, a secretariat was established in 1984 and took care of the practicalities concerning a total of 9 returns, each encompassing a certain geographical or type materials. So in a period from 1984 to 2001, there was 9 areas which you returned from Denmark to Greenland. Maybe I can tell about why it has been succeeded in this way. One of the strong points was that we established a committee consisted of professional museum backgrounds rather than political background. The cooperation was formalized with the appointment of a committee to monitor and head the process. And this committee consisted of 3 members from both sides in order to divide and point out the objects to return. The committee worked out of a series of basic principles, as I can tell a little bit more a little later. But we have some lessons to learn in this process. In the Greenland case, that is also the willingness to share, not only sharing of objects, but also sharing of knowledge, exchange of knowledge, and wishes for collaboration in future research, excavations, conservations, and establishing of common exhibitions, and so on and so on. So in this way, maybe a brief story that the both sides were willing to cooperate on that process.
It's really interesting to hear about the process and how structured it was and how complicated it was. Could you talk a little bit more about the principles that were used to determine what objects would be returned?
Yes. The Greenlandic government negotiated with the Danish with a claim for repatriations. After that, the committee worked out with 5 principles. Mm-hmm. First, that both Greenland and Denmark would hold a representative museum collections of objects from Greenland. Secondly, that both collections would contain ample materials suitable for popularization, research, study, and teaching. And third, that the collections or group of objects naturally belonging together would remain together. In cases whether this was impracticable, loans or permanent loans were to be negotiated between the two museums. And as fourth principle, should the Greenlanders wish return of special finds or objects of importance for their cultural identity, such wishes should be respected. And last, the historical interest of Danish museums would also be similarly respected. So it is the five main principles to be respected in this process.
That's those are very important principles, I think, and also the fact that the collections are now in two places, that they weren't just sort of completely removed from one museum to another, speaks to both the speaks to the complexity of the process of repatriation, but also speaks to some of the fears that you hear museums expressing, that once repatriation is begun, then the museum that currently holds all the objects is going to lose them all, that the collections will be empty. But in fact, what has happened, especially in this case, is that the collections are in a sense shared, that you have the Greenland National Museum has collections, but the National Museum of Denmark still holds some Greenlandic collections. So it's not a wholesale removal of collections from one place to another.
That's right.
I'm curious to know, Eeva-Kristiina spoke very movingly about the sort of stories, silent knowledge that the collections contain, and that how when the objects return to the place that they came from, the objects have more meaning and have more stories and traditions connected with them that are in a way enlivened by their return. Is there a way that you have shared some of that knowledge with the National Museum of Denmark again, so that they are learning more about the objects that they gave back to you?
Well, obviously, that was one of the discussions we had when we had our weekly meetings, making the exhibition, and this was in the center of our discussions. And I think that in somehow we have had some, for example, we had a large seminar that was arranged in National Museum. It was a seminar totally in Sámi, Northern Sámi language, and then translated to Finnish language, where we have discussed and tried to lift and bring these aspects to the knowledge. And I think that the National Museum of Finland has been very active. For example, this summer and this fall, there has been a lot of internal training about colonialism, about the meaning of collections, and also about the meaning of these objects. So we are running a total kind of a program that the National Museum is running, and we are sharing the thoughts that these objects have meanings, but perhaps not so much per se about the meanings themselves, because there is also information that is kind of the meaning is to have it inside the society, and so maybe, I mean, the National Museum acknowledges very well at least the people I know, that these objects, like Elina Anttila, who is the general director, she said, well, these objects clearly have a larger meaning in the source community. And I think that actually having looked at these processes for a long time and having tried to understand I respect all the repatriation processes, and they all are, they have simultaneous aims, but they are also different. And actually one of my I think that the character of the nation that is the nation that returns the objects has to do with the way the repatriation process goes. And I want to know, I will stereotypize very strongly, but I think that the Danish and Norwegian and Swedish people are more people who like to negotiate very much. But in Finland, I think the character of the nation is kind of like Elina Anttila and Juhani Kostet said, it's right, we will do it. There's nothing to negotiate. And we will still do cooperation. And I think the cooperation will be stronger after this. I mean, we made an exhibition that I think is fantastic. I really think it's really good exhibition. And it's very moving, and it's very, you can learn a lot from it. And and I have to say, I'm so proud of my colleagues in the National Museum of Finland, and I'm so proud of the National Museum of Finland for being such a good cooperation partner and handling and discussing these things equally together with the Sámi Museum. And I think that it's just the way we Finns do. We kind of say, okay, this is what we are going to do, and then we are going to do it. While in other cultures, maybe the way you have a discussion, it's different. Now this is just my personal opinion, but so I respect all the ways, but I think this was a correct way for us to do it.
Thank you. So I'm curious to know if either Martin or Daniel have a response to that, whether they feel that there's a difference between the way these two processes have worked.
I could try to give an attempt. I don't know sufficiently, and I'm so happy to learn about the Finnish process. Speaking from where I'm sitting at the National Museum of Denmark, I think there's an important process going on at the time when this started, the repatriation and the development or the establishment of the Greenland University. So part of the repatriation process with the viewpoints of the classes of them were that there was some capacity building was necessary to develop in Greenland. And as it had turned out, I'm mostly surprised by the speed with which this has happened in Greenland. There's one after the other PhD being produced now. University level are extremely high, and it's exactly the same, in my opinion, you could say, for a good colleagues at the National Museum of Greenland, and they are most certainly surpassing us in some areas, and we are one but several partners. And I think in practicality, we have a long shared history, and we have an understanding of each other, both our similarities and differences that ties into our deep history on the one hand side. On the other hand side, the stronger Greenland gets, and she has certainly been strong for a long time, in particular after 2009 with the introduction of the self-government, the stronger a collaboration partner she has become. And so we can now ask questions, academic questions, a question that may potentially be important for our societies, both our societies, which not only pertain to our joint history, but pertain to something wider. For example, discussing under some sort of heading of lessons from the North. It's becoming more and more obvious that Greenland, along with the other Arctic countries, have very important lessons for the rest of the world that they actually need to know. For instance, on developing a sharing economy that reduce the expenditure of resources in a new world suffering, and so on. So it's just one example. So many after the other, and this could never ever have happened without the capacity building in Greenland, and in particular Greenland absolutely taking off like a rocket when it comes to self-confidence, to knowledge, to taking initiative. So that's the briefest I can say. I think it's, I guess I'm in that sense an anthropologist. So I think it's every story is particular. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. We have some questions in the chat. One is, Kyle, can you bring back everyone so we can all see one another? We have a question for Eeva-Kristiina. You've written a wonderful book about one specific object in Sámi culture, the women's horn hat, and how its return to Sápmi has also led to discussions about rematriation and to workshops to recreate examples of the hat. Could you speak a little bit about that experience?
Well, I can briefly say that this hat is a very special hat used in 1750 to the beginning of the 20th century in certain areas of Sámi land in Norway and in Finland. Nowadays, Norway and Finland, in certain areas. And it had a wooden protrusion inside of it, so it looked very stunning. And its use was stopped because of the Laestadian revival movement. I don't know. It's a Lutheran pietistic movement, which is very strict in matters like you should not decorate yourself and you should be humble and look like humble. And so this hat was abandoned by the woman, and they said that the devil lives in that horn. But it became a narrative that says that the priest denied the use of the hat. So it was a very, interesting but also very difficult to start to work with it, because it has to do with Lutheran religion, which is quite strong here in the area. So basically, when I started to work with this project in 2006, we knew only that there are a couple of horn hats in the National Museum of Finland. So year by year, we have learned a little bit more. And now we know that there are over 60 hats in all the Europe that are preserved. But in Sámi land, there is only one hat and the other ones are on loan. But now after, for example, this repatriation from the National Museum of Finland, we have 4 hats in Sida in the Sámi Museum of Finland. And so we started to study these hats. We went to archive. I did this research together with the Sámi contemporary artist Outi Pieski. Sorry for forgetting her name. So we visited archives, we visited museums, we did a lot of research, and then we did object research, like we archaeologists do, and took the patterns, and then we went and shared all of our knowledge with the Sámi women in that area where the hat was used. And we were kind of all the time in interaction. Is this okay what we are doing? Can we go further? What would you like to hear? So it was all the time a research we did together, all of us. And then we decided to make workshops where the women, Sámi women who own this tradition, could use modern methods and remake this kind of hat to themselves. And and they did it. Over 30 women. I know that's not a lot, but it's a beginning. And all the time, these kind of workshops we gave in Northern Sámi, and you know, everyone was Sámi, so that well, I am not a Sámi, but I can speak Northern Sámi. So it was a kind of a free and safe environment to be a Sámi, and then, while discussing all the facts and then doing this kind of the same movements your ancestors have done, it became clear that these hats have a lot to tell to the women who worked with them. And so I interviewed the people who took part in this, and then finally we kind of published a book where we have gathered all the knowledge together, but also we have given the voice to these Sámi women who have taken part in our workshops. And so this is our kind of treasure coffin to the Sámi women as a thank you for letting us do this research. And it has also inspired my co-worker Outi to make lots of art, so which has been seen in Venice Biennale, in Gwangju Biennale in Southern Korea. It is currently in Oslo. In the beginning of next year, it's going to be in Stockholm. It has been all over the world. So it's kind of, and it shows that these objects can, when you work with them, it can help you speak of difficult things. And they are, it's empowering. And so this process where these objects are taken back to the society and re-socialized as members of the society, this is what I call rematriation.
That's great. So, so thank you. You've all spoken very movingly about how, and impressively about how the repatriation process has enhanced the work that you do in your museums. What have the repatriation projects affected the museum, the whole museum? Are they just have they just had an impact on the people who work with the collections, or has the process had a larger impact on the whole museum and the way that the museum operates? Anyone can answer that.
Maybe I start. Martin, is it okay if I start?
Yes, please.
Sorry about the background noise early on. That was my typical luck, that when I started talking, there is something very loud happening in the hallway. But now I'm in a closed small room, so it will be okay. First of all, I'd like to comment on what Eeva-Kristiina beautifully said there in many words, but the hats, those are, to me, kind of the perfect example of how these collections and individual objects become alive. They started living before my eyes, I could see. I saw those in our storerooms, the few hats, the complete hats that we had, but also the kind of the support pieces that were inside the hat. And they were totally new to me, so to speak. I couldn't make out really anything out of them except that they were beautifully made. That's it. But then I saw Sámi people interact with these, and I saw very moving reactions, like from movie maker Suvi West, who came to the collection center and saw those. So they started to make sense to me as well. And then now in the exhibition, as Eeva-Kristiina explained, there are artworks, and one of them is by Outi Pieski, which collects those hats that you found in your research together, and it forms a big piece of art in the exhibition hall now. And that's my favorite in the whole exhibition, because in that artwork I can see the objects and the collection is coming alive, because it's back in the community and they are starting this process of rematriation, as you beautifully. Oh, you have an image of that in the background, Eeva-Kristiina. Thanks.
Yes, I put it there so that you can see the hat, and this is the artwork that Eero is talking about. It's called 47 Most Wanted Foremothers.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's kind of pop art, and that's wonderful, because now it's somehow.
Yeah, it's inspired by Andy Warhol.
Yeah, but what has happened at the National Museum during these repatriations? For one, we have a repatriation policy now. We have gone through the whole collection, everything that we have, and we have written a policy. So that has changed. Now we are a lot more ready when these discussions start with other parts of our collection. We are kind of very prepared and very willing to continue discussions about returning objects. And that's also because we follow ICOM's code of ethic. Of course, we are very willing to start and participate in discussions about such projects.
We have several other additional questions. We have one of the viewers said that they're surprised that there's no representative of museums in Norway participating in this discussion, and we're very aware that we were selective in this process and couldn't include everyone in a very brief discussion. So there's more to be learned from what's happened in Norway, and perhaps in the future we can feature the other Nordic countries and their similar experiences with repatriation. There's a question: as a Finnish American academic with Sámi ancestry, I spent hours in the Helsinki National Museum a few years ago looking for Sámi representation. I was disturbed to not find any naming of Sámi people in the prehistory room. I found in a different location one old black and white tourist film that included the Skolt Sámi. Maybe I missed something, but I left feeling upset about what seemed like a manifestation of a bigger issues of erasure and racism. I do recognize some of the impacts of Sámi nation building on the colonization of Sámi, but I'm interested in hearing if Eero or Eeva-Kristiina would be willing to speak about this, as well as the type of representation of Sámi, if any, that is planned in the National Museum in the future, and who will engage in it.
Maybe I can start. I can tell you about our most recent part of the basic or the main exhibition, which was completed this year, and maybe some of the rooms that you, Maria Eloheimo, who commented, thanks for your comments, that was not there when you visited the museum. But now how we did it this time, we do not have a separate room for Sámi culture or Sámi objects, but they are kind of scattered in together with other objects inside the themes and inside the story that we are telling. So there is no discussion of a separate people called Sámi people, but they are kind of belonging to the whole of nationalities and people that have lived in this area. And everything that we have included in the exhibition, that has been done together with Sida Museum, together with the specialist at the Sida Museum. So from now on, everything that we do on Sámi issues, that will be done strongly in collaboration with Sida. Of course, also for that reason that all the objects are now in Sida. So if we want to present something related to Sámi culture, and we do want to do that, it will be only done in cooperation, and the Sámi people will have a strong voice in how things are represented.
Is that the case too with the National Museum of Denmark and the Greenlandic Museum? When the National Museum of Denmark does anything related to Greenland, there's a collaboration now.
I'll try to answer the question. When it comes to exhibition, the answer is quite clear. No, that's not the case at all. And I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future. Part of the process as it played out, and Daniel, please do comment on this afterwards. It has been extremely important that, as far as I read it, for Greenland to have her own agenda, to go her own way, and to have her own research priorities. And I think in this particular situation, or this particular sort of historical, I think that it has, for the time being, more important for Greenland and the National Museum in Greenland to develop her own thing and let us go with our own thing. And then when it comes to the exhibitions, and I would certainly think sometimes we already working on a lot of research questions, excavations, and other things throughout, making joint projects, dissemination projects abroad, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the exhibition themselves, I would imagine that would take some time before that would change. But Daniel, please comment.
Yes, you talk on exhibitions, but I will say that this cooperation between Denmark and Greenland, it represents a partnership based on trust and mutual respect. And after this process, we have also, since the repatriation process, there have been a continued dialogue on all levels between the two national museums, and a number of successful joint research projects have been conducted following the repatriation. So all in all, I will say that this process has given us a lot of possibilities to further cooperations with Denmark. So in this way, I will say that our keywords as mutual respect and wishes for collaborations has been succeeded a lot, I will say. And we have always been open to further projects on our objects repatriated from Denmark.
Sorry about that. Thank you. And I think that's on that note where I see that we're over time. So I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining us today and talking about the process of repatriation. And it's been a wonderful discussion and a moving discussion to hear how this isn't just moving objects from one place to another. It has great meaning and significance for everyone who participates in the process. So I thank you very much and look forward to future conversations on this topic. And thank you.